Well, I didn't expect to be here doing this so soon, but hey, I will easily take a post-Easter surprise, especially when it's about something that I like this much. What am I talking about, you might be asking? Well, if you click this, you probably already know, but we'll say it anyway because it's just too awesome not to give credit. An Archdemon's Dilemma, How to Love Your Elf Bride, actually released its second episode on the same day as its first episode. This is rather unusual for anime, although we certainly get things occasionally like the Oshinoko or the Demon Slayer first episodes are often longer. But this is a bit different because it was two separate episodes. That said, I'm really glad they did it because while, as I said in my first video about this, I really liked the first episode, I did feel that it didn't quite do enough for somebody who wasn't really as familiar with the source material. I was really comfortable with how it went and what speed it went at and stuff like that because I felt they did a good job at actually showing what was happening in the story and letting it develop, but there wasn't enough really given to the story that I was entirely sure that someone who didn't know what was coming would be enticed enough to come back. I think that provided somebody watches both of these, especially now that they're both out together and everything, I think that we can lay a lot of those fears a lot more to rest because with the two episodes put together, I think that it does a much better job of actually ensuring that someone understands what is going on here and what they are getting themselves into. Episode 2 picks up where episode 1 left off. We actually find that instead of sleeping in that room, because there was nothing in there to sleep on, and that room was a mess, it just went kaboom, right? So instead, she ends up sleeping beside Zagan's throne, and we actually see him wake up, and then we see the camera pan down to her, and she is wrapped in his cloak, which is absolutely precious. And then we see them actually figure out breakfast, and oh boy, is that a mess, because Zagan, like Nephi, actually comes from a background where he dealt with abuse, and he dealt with poverty, and he dealt with all of these bad things. And we actually get to see a consequence of that on his character, because the food that he ends up offering her, and the food that, more importantly, he's been eating himself, is the kind of stuff that you would either feed to animals or slaves. And it's not because he's trying to disrespect her, it's because that's what he's been eating and that's what he still perceives as normal. And Nephi is like, what the hell is going on? I mean, she's sitting there and thinking, I understand if he wants to feed that to me, but what the hell is he doing eating it? So she actually makes the suggestion that she should cook breakfast, and he's like, okay, but we're going to need to go get some groceries. Which leads to their next problem. Zagan spent every cent he had in his decision to buy Nephi. He doesn't have a cent left to his name because, I mean, he didn't go through a normal auction procedure. He didn't try to, like, control the spending or anything like that. He actually just, like, put every cent that he had down, which is something I wanted to talk about that I didn't talk about last time because I think that's a really important note and gesture. I think it is like a symbolism of how sincere that he actually feels, whether he is consciously aware of it or not entirely, that he was willing to give up everything that he had, at least economically, in order to procure her and to have this opportunity to get to know her and stuff. And thinking back on that, I thought that was actually very sweet, and I thought that was actually a very clever step in the storytelling that I wanted to take a moment to pay attention to. So they head out and they get to the point where they find this carriage that's going by, and the carriage master is like, we will give you a ride for 3 bronze coins. And for a moment, Zagan is like, okay, whatever, great. And then he realizes, oh crap, I'm actually broke, because it took him that long to really have that sink in. And then he's like, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to like rob the stagecoach or something to get money? And he's like, no, I can't do that because that would upset Nephi, and I don't want to upset Nephi. So you can already see how Nephi's presence is influencing Zagan's thinking and his morality, which is an interesting thing because I think that to an extent that happens to anyone who ends up having feelings for someone if they have that person around and everything. I think that's one of the positives or negatives, depending on what it's doing to you and on what it's encouraging you to do as a person, of caring about another person. I think that's really interesting. So they can't pay the money, so they walk away and they start going down the road, and then of course the coach gets attacked by bandits. And Zagan is like, whatever, don't be afraid of them. But Nephi is terrified, and Zagan's like, oh my god, I wonder if that's how she ended up in this situation to begin with, which bugs him. And he is like, hold on, I'll show you that you have nothing to fear. So we get a sequence of him beating the crap out of some bandits, which it gets to show us some of his fighting moves and stuff, which is cool. And then it turns out they have a sorcerer with them, so we get a bit of a sorcerer battle, and we get to see a bit more of what Zagan can actually do, which is a neat thing. We also get to see his continued thoughts about how he feels that what he's doing might be affecting Neffy versus how Neffy is actually reacting, which is hilarious because for a moment Zagan is all thinking like, I'm so badass, and then you look over at Neffy and Neffy's just like, oh my god, I'm scared. Like, okay, I don't have to be afraid of the bandits, but you might be a problem. Not that she has any like intent or anything, as I've pointed out, but like, holy crap, your powers are terrifying. So in the end, they end up getting money from the people with the caravan because they needed something to save them anyway, and they end up getting the ride and they go into town. When we get to town, we get another pair of interesting sequences with these two. First off, we get one where Zagan has realized that Neffy needs clothes because Neffy is having trouble walking around in the dress that she came with. And he's like, well, we gotta fix that. So they go into a clothing shop, and the woman inside of the clothing shop is like, oh, and she sees the color and she's like, wait right here, I know exactly what you need. So she takes Neffy, they go in the back, and of course Neffy comes out in some fucking skank suit with like straps instead of actual clothing, and like more of her body uncovered than is covered. And of course Zagan and Neffy are both just like, end me please, because they are so embarrassed. And the woman is like, oh, is that not what you wanted? And then Zagan is like, no. And so they go back in, and this time the woman brings Neffy out in an outfit that is much more like covered and controlled and everything. It's a maid's costume, but it's not an ordinary maid's costume. It's actually made of high quality silks, and the boots that she gives Neffy, like that she puts on Neffy to try on and for Zagan to potentially buy rather, are boots that are imbued with healing magic so that when Neffy is walking around, Neffy's feet won't get sore. And of course Zagan is like, yes, that's much more what I'm looking for. And he asks Neffy whether she likes the stuff, and Neffy is like, whatever you think is appropriate, master. And he's like, no. He's like, do you like the stuff? And then the sales clerk is like, I could always put you back in the other thing. And Neffy is like, no, I like the clothes. And it's like, yes, Neffy, please, sweetheart, you gotta start thinking. I know it's hard. And as I said, I can see that it's hard, and I can see that these writers have actually paid a decent amount of consequence to the level of trauma their characters have gone through, from what I was saying earlier with Zagan and the food, which from a writing standpoint is absolutely superb and adds with great integrity to the kind of story that they're telling, because as I've said all along, I'm aware of kind of where this is going, which is one of the reasons I'm very confident about it. But with this overall premise, I can understand why people are alarmed, are concerned, and are like, oh my god, because it is the kind of premise where if it was done wrong, it could go really, really, really bad. But that doesn't seem to be the case here, thank goodness. So they leave the clothing store, and the next place that they decide they're going to go, Zagan wants to see about getting Neffy's collar taken off because it's blocking her magic, it's not doing her any favors, and it needs to go. So they go into that shop, and it turns out that the guy inside the shop is actually somebody that Zagan rescued like a year ago. And we find out from the guy after Zagan is gone that Zagan used to be so scary in his like demeanor and stuff that the guy didn't even approach him to thank him back in the day. So Zagan had no idea that he saved this dude, and who knows how many other things Zagan's actions versus his appearance and his attitude and his stance have actually done for people. I think we're going to see that continue throughout the story, and I think that's a really cool thing. But anyway, we find out that we can't just take the collar off because, as we learned last episode, the collar is imbued with some kind of magic, and the blacksmith warns us that we can't just try to force the collar off, because if we do, we could wind up decapitating Neffy, which of course would absolutely not be what we're aiming for here. So we end up leaving that, and then they decide that, hey, we should go and have some dinner because they haven't really had anything to eat since their breakfast, and I'll leave that in quotes because we know what that was. And so they go to this pub to have food because Zagan is like, I can't have Neffy cook for me right now because we just both spent all day in the city and that's not fair. Which I thought was kind of cute. So they go into this pub and they order their food and everything, and Neffy's just staring at the food. She's not eating it, and Zagan is like, is something wrong with the food or something? And Neffy doesn't realize at first that she's supposed to eat it, that it's actually hers. And then once she does realize that because of Zagan, she's still struggling because she doesn't actually know how to use a spoon or a fork because she's never actually in her life sat down to have any form of a proper meal of any kind whatsoever. So we see her actually try to get a hold of this cherry tomato with a fork. It's bouncing around, it's messing up. She finally grabs a spoon and spoons the thing and eats it. And then she ends up deciding to try and feed one to Zagan. And of course, Zagan is the color of a tomato and it's precious as hell. And then he feeds one to her, and the people inside of the tavern are laughing and thinking it's cute and everything. And it's just a wonderful, adorable, really touching and romantic sequence. I really, really liked how that turned out. I thought that was so cute and showing just the kind of people these people are going to be toward each other. I really like that. I also like the fact that during this scene, Neffy actually asks Zagan, can I do things if I think they're going to be good for you? And he says, of course you can. And this is the first time we've ever seen Neffy really try to have any kind of autonomy in anything. And it's interesting because we are seeing her do that in some regard, but of course we're also seeing her continue to have some form of trauma or damage going on because it's not for herself, it's for him. But I think hopefully as this story progresses and we get to see them care about each other more and stuff, that's not necessarily going to be a net negative. The other big thing that happens in this episode is that we actually get to see a sequence with the red-haired girl from early in episode 1. We get to find out that her name is Chastel and that she is actually a holy knight and that she works for the church. And we find out that the church, as far as I'm concerned at least, are a bunch of scumfucks. But of course, we're seeing this from somebody who has seen Zagan's point of view and who sees what kind of character Zagan is. The church obviously does not have the insight that we do as viewers. So the church, which has a track record of thinking that sorcerers are evil, and given what we know about what sorcerers generally do, that's not necessarily wrong. There are obviously some very sick and twisted individuals among the sorcerers. But they want to get rid of Zagan. And the guy who is in charge of this church tells Chastel, who knows that Zagan saved her life in the last episode, that Zagan is the one who is kidnapping young women and using them for spells. Chastel does not believe this, but realizes she can't really say anything about it, and in the end, she actually offers to be the one to go and deal with Zagan. So we're gonna have to see whether that means that she's actually gonna fight him, or whether that means that she is going to maybe do something else, or warn him, or pretend to attack him, or I have no idea. It could be any number of things. As I said, I only saw snippets and pieces of this, enough to know that I thought it would be good. But there seems to be a lot of options of what could go down there. I also think that it's good that we see a glimpse of something like this, because while I love the sugar overload of all of the romantic stuff going on in this episode, I also recognize that as this is a shonen romance, and also a fantasy series, that simply having cute, gooey moments between the two leads is not going to be enough to hold up the audience that this is likely trying to attract. And I mean, as somebody who loves romance, but who also loves fantasy and adventure and action and stuff, even I don't necessarily want something where every second is spent doing gooey shit. So hopefully we'll get to see a bit more world building and a bit more of what the overall conflict and like the plot B of this is going to be, in contrast to the romance, the comedy, and the character growth. The last thing I want to touch on before I go is that in the ending credits, we actually see Neffy curled up in this little bed in a bedroom, and it was just absolutely the cutest thing. I don't know whether they were able to fix the bedroom she liked and whether he put like the only bed in the castle in there or something, or whether she is in his room or what's going on exactly, but she's there, she's on her own, nothing weird is going on. But it's just, I just thought it was so cute that they added that little touch to show us that she is sleeping comfortably and is all right and everything, and he's out staring at the stars in the ending. It was just a great little wrap up. But anyway, I think that covers everything I wanted to say about episode 2. Again, I still can't believe that we are having this conversation right now, but that's pretty awesome. And I wanted to make sure, with the fact that they surprised me by bringing this out, that I then turned around and made sure to do a video on it and surprise you guys, because this is like the show I'm the most eager to talk about this season. And of course, I wanted to make sure with new content being out that I covered it. Anyway, I will see you guys in the next video, and I will talk to you later. Bye!